Hi, I'm Stephanie Vecchio, and this is episode 48 in our History Bites series. Today we will talk about the Christmas Truce, an almost mythological event that took place during World War I on and around Christmas. In the summer of 1914, Europe went to war, believing that the conflict should be over by the year's end. Instead, the war went on for 4 years, and tens of millions of people died. In fact, the effects of World War I, also called the Great War, can still be felt today. By December of 1914, the war was ravaging Europe, and the Germans and British had come to a stalemate. The horrors and shock of trench warfare had become a harsh reality for these soldiers, with seemingly endless rain leading to a cold and muddy existence. No man's land separated the Germans and the British by only 50 yards. These men stayed hunkered in the trenches, enduring the hard, miserable existence that only war can bring, and dreaming of being home for Christmas. For the German and British men fighting in Flanders and France, disillusionment was regularly the order of the day. What was supposed to be over by Christmas seemed endless now. December had been a hard month, with trench fighting and rain. By Christmas Eve, frost and light snow lay delicately on the ground of Belgium and France. In early December, an attempt was made to secure an official truce for the holidays. Pope Benedict had ascended to the papacy just a month after World War I began, and on December 7th he issued an appeal to the leaders of Europe. He asked that the guns may fall silent at least upon the night the angels sang. The hope was that a truce would give all countries a chance to negotiate at least a path to peace, but the leaders were not interested in that path, and so the fighting was meant to continue through Christmas. The soldiers at the front recognized that a truce could be had at some point, particularly when the German Emperor William II sent Christmas trees to German soldiers. The Germans would sing Christmas hymns like Stille Nacht or Silent Night in English, and British and Allied forces would sing their own Christmas carols. Although on opposite sides of the war, some Brits spoke German, and many of the German soldiers actually spoke English, having worked in England before the war. This lingua franca allowed for easier communication between the trenches and helped to facilitate what would be a hopeful, if fleeting, truce between the two sides. The German troops in particular are credited with beginning a dialogue between the two sides, and the Saxon troops calling out to the English across no man's land, "We are Saxons, you are Anglo-Saxons. What is there for us to fight about?" On Christmas Eve, as both German and British soldiers sang carols, they are noted as telling their men not to fire unless fired upon. This policy came to be known as live and let live, and would be adopted on an ad hoc basis throughout the war, particularly in less active sectors. The officers' decisions were made without any authorization from their superiors, and the unofficial truce slowly started to take hold. As morning broke on Christmas Day, German soldiers emerged from their trenches, waving their arms to demonstrate that they had no ill intent. When it became clear that they were not carrying weapons, British soldiers soon joined them, meeting in no man's land to socialize and exchange gifts. Rifleman Oswald Tilley told his parents in a letter home, "Literally hundreds of each side were out in no man's land, shaking hands." In addition to this exchange, soldiers wrote home to loved ones saying that they played football, or soccer, in no man's land. It is speculated that in some areas, the Germans won the games. One brigade's, the Rifle Brigade, official history insisted that no match took place because it would have been most unwise to allow the Germans to know how weakly the British trenches were held. But there is plenty of evidence that football was played on Christmas Day, mostly by men of the same nationality, but in at least 3 or 4 places between troops from the opposing sides. While the Germans and British could partake in lively and fun activities, the most common activities in areas observing the Christmas Truce were joint services to bury the dead. Perhaps recognizing that the peace surely could not last, both sides also used the truce to improve and reinforce their trenches. In most places, up and down the front, it was accepted and expected that the truce would be temporary. Men returned to their trenches at dusk, in some cases brought back by flares, but in most places the peace lasted until midnight. There was more singing, but soldiers knew what would continue to take place the next day. George Eade of the Rifle Brigade had become friends with a German artilleryman who spoke good English, and as he left, this new acquaintance said to him, "Today we have peace. Tomorrow you fight for your country, I fight for mine. Good luck." Fighting began again the next day, though there were unconfirmed reports from some troops that fighting remained suspended into the new year. And it does not seem to have been uncommon for the continuation of the war to be marked with further displays of mutual respect between enemies. In the trenches occupied by the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, Captain Stockwell climbed up on the parapet, fired 3 shots in the air, and put up a flag with Merry Christmas on it. At this, his opposite number, Hauptmann von Sinner, appeared on the German parapet, and both officers bowed and saluted. Von Sinner then also fired 2 shots in the air and went back into his trench. Still, the war was on again, and there would be no further truce until the general armistice of November 1918, when the Great War ended. Many of the thousands of men who celebrated Christmas 1914 together would not live to see the return of peace, but for those who did survive, the truce was something that would never be forgotten. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, click subscribe. See you next time.